Um, Welcome, everyone. I know some people will be coming in shortly. We have about 100 people who have signed up. And so we're looking forward to a good conversation today. My name is Bruce McConnell. I'm your moderator today. We have quite a big topic to discuss. We're discussing a wide range of matters here about cyberspace development, peace and security in cyberspace at the global, regional, and national level. We have 14 of the 16 SADC countries represented, and about half the participants registered are from Africa, or no, three quarters of the participants registered. So we are very happy to have had the support to date so far, and in fact, this morning, of the Department of International Relations and Cooperation of South Africa and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Netherlands and the Embassy of the Netherlands in South Africa. And we're our partner also, Enrico Calandro from Research ICT Africa. So we will start by taking a look at the agenda here. And just to show that we have our two introductory panelists, and then the agenda slide should be coming up anytime now. And then we have the, right, there we go. That's our opening part of the agenda. Moving right along, we have, after that, we'll have the moderated panel and concluding remarks. Then we have a housekeeping slide, which will be coming up, please. So the meeting is being recorded. We'll make it available online afterward. Interpretation is available in French and Portuguese. If you use the button at the bottom of your screen, you can select a channel. If you just want to hear the raw feed, just leave the translation off. But if you want French or English, that's available. We want this to be interactive. So once we all stop talking, we ask that you use the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen to submit questions at any point. You can also use the chat to share links or other information you think would be good for the group. All right, thank you for those slides. And basically, just as a little background, this project, this meeting is part of a larger project that is sponsored primarily by the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs. It is designed to explore the types of things we're talking about today, the relationship between development, sustainability in the digital world and peace and security in the digital world at an international level, for example, at the UN, which we'll be talking about today, at a regional level, in this case, Southern Africa, and at a national level as well. So it's a great project, and we're using it to help people connect with each other in the region, and also to expand the awareness both from on the international level of what the priorities in the region are, and also what's going on at the international level. So we're hopeful that this is the second virtual meeting we've had in Pretoria, and we are hopeful to have an in-person meeting next year with all of you who are or many of you who can come and have a longer conversation. That'll be about a day and a half meeting. So anyway, we're looking forward to that once life gets somewhat more back to normal. Anyway, let me begin by introducing our first speaker, Ambassador Mxakato-Diseko, Deputy Director General, Global Governance and Continental Agenda, Department of International Relations and Cooperation of South Africa, to give a few introductory welcoming remarks. Ambassador?
Ambassador Hans Peters, Ambassador of the Kingdom of the Netherlands to South Africa, Ambassador Nathalie Jaarsma, Ambassador at Large for Security, Policy and Cyber, and other friends from the Netherlands, Mr. Bruce W. McDonald, Distinguished Fellow Observer, Research Foundation, America, distinguished panel members and Southern African cyber experts, invited guests, ladies and gentlemen. Let me take this opportunity to welcome you all. It gives me great pleasure to participate in the second edition of the Southern African Global Cyber Policy Dialogue. The hosting of these virtual sessions and the collaborative efforts by all the partners are an illustration of the type of regional and international cooperation that Minister Naledi Pandor, Dr. Pandor, and her then Dutch counterpart, Minister Stef Blok, were seeking to promote towards harnessing the development potential of a more secure and stable cyber space. This kind of engagement is even more relevant given the number of cyber attacks that governments are facing today. Drawing on the experiences of the inaugural session held in October 2020, today's session is also held virtually following on the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. It is our belief that all the work done thus far will stand us in good stead for the much anticipated in-person session to hopefully be held in 2022. Although fraught with well-documented challenges, this pandemic also presents opportunities that can be exploited to bring about positive change, including in cyberspace. Friends and colleagues, the advent of new technologies and the benefits thereof cannot and should not be regarded as the exclusive purview of the few established players and industry leaders. Developing countries with their growing youthful populations, particularly in Africa, present an opportunity for a digital revolution that has the potential to significantly alter socioeconomic conditions in our societies, in particular in our continent, in accordance with Agenda 2063, which is the aspirational agenda that anticipated Agenda 2030. The future of work, technology, and knowledge is significantly different from what we have come to know and accept. And it is only just and prudent that the majority of those who will remain long after us are equipped with the necessary skills and capacity to take humanity forward. It is therefore the view of my government that engagements such as this will help us better understand the revolutionary potential and transformative nature of the digital space, and perhaps also provide a model for further collaboration in this regard. The need for socioeconomic transformation of our societies has become ever more urgent, and cyberspace is one of the many avenues where opportunities exist for that purpose. New technologies such as artificial intelligence, robotics, Internet of Things, 3D printing and blockchain have come to the fore, and we have to give our future generations a head start to harness the benefits of these technologies. However, even though opportunities do exist in that space, there are inherent challenges that require concerted efforts to transform the space. This need for digital transformation requires a broad consensus amongst national, regional, and international stakeholders, whereby established and nascent players come together to set up mutually beneficial arrangements within the international arena. The ultimate goal of these mutually beneficial arrangements must be to ensure that the required assistance is made available in line with the United Nations development ethos as a basis. Ladies and gentlemen, in pursuance of the socioeconomic development agenda and transition to knowledge-based economies, the transformation of the digital space should not only be confined to bridging the digital divide between and within nations of the world, but should equally address the issue of security and resilience of the cyberspace. Nonetheless, at this juncture, it is almost reflexive to elevate the need to bridge the digital divide above other considerations due to the practical conditions of the current digital configuration between developed and developing countries. Although it may be insensible to place digital equality, security and resilience on the same footing. The reality is that without deliberate interventions, the fast-paced developments in the digital space have the potential to exacerbate the already existing inequalities. It is crucial that the requisite resources, financial, technical, and otherwise, be deployed not only to focus on hardware issues, but on the entire ecosystem of the digital space to bring about equality. It is in this context that broader stakeholder engagements should be convened under the leadership of governments, working with industry, non-governmental organizations, non-profit organizations, academia, and civil society to ensure coherent, workable, and fit for purpose solutions. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to recall and reiterate how South Africa's National Development Plan places strategic importance to the issue of digital transformation for South Africa. Accordingly, the transformation of South Africa into an inclusive and innovative digital and knowledge society is inextricably linked to the digital transformation agenda. I am sure that colleagues participating in this session from fellow Southern African countries will share similar views, if not experiences, with us regarding their respective national outlooks on the need for transformation of this important sector. I look forward to enriching engagements with fellow South African colleagues in this regard. As I conclude, permit me to express my profound appreciation to the Netherlands Ministry of Foreign Affairs for co-hosting this virtual Southern African Global Cyber Policy Dialogue, as well as to Observer Research Foundation America and Research ICT for Africa for partnering with us in this effort. I wish success to the second edition of the Southern African Global Cyber Policy Dialogue. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador, for those inspiring remarks about digital transformation and the various pressures we all have to balance in creating a knowledge-based economies. So awesome start. Turning it over to you, Ambassador Jaarsma. Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much, Bruce. Dear participants, all protocol observed. Thank you all for joining, and thank you to Ambassador Diseko for her insightful opening remarks. It gives me great pleasure to be part of this exciting and thought-provoking roundtable on digital transformation. A little less than a year ago, I had the opportunity to speak at the first iteration of this event, jointly organized by the governments of the Netherlands and South Africa with ORF America and Research ICT Africa. The Netherlands has been an early adopter of digital technologies, enabling us to become a leading digital nation. Even before COVID-19 struck, the digital economy contributed to over 8% of the total Dutch economy. In that sense, the open nature of our economy and strong internet infrastructure have been conducive to innovation and research. Yet access to an open, free, stable and secure internet is not evenly distributed across the world and also within societies, both in the Netherlands and in South Africa. It is commonly understood that bridging the digital divide is a fundamental step to ensure that humankind is able to reap the social, economic and human development benefits of the digital environment. We want to enable people, young people and women in particular, to participate in the digital economy, to build their livelihoods and to create the digital world in line with their values and priorities. While our societies and governments engage in efforts to bridge the digital divide, there are two important elements to take into account. Both of these elements revolve around trust. Trust is key to maintaining an open, free, stable, and secure cyberspace. Firstly, our citizens, companies, and organizations need to be able to trust the security and integrity of the digital solutions they use and develop in their everyday life. They need to know that their personal data are not being stolen, misused, leaked, or accumulated in an unlawful manner. And they need to know that the digital systems they depend on will not be disrupted. This is more or less the technical side of trust. Secondly, our citizens and companies, but also our governments, need to trust each other to build a flourishing, innovative, and equitable digital economy. Now, trust is obviously not a given. Every day, our countries suffer from malicious cyber operations by state and non-state actors, which have real-life consequences. Recently, the Port of Durban in South Africa and schools and municipalities in the Netherlands have been the target of cyber attacks. We could call this the human side of trust. Of course, these two elements are very much two sides of the same coin. On the one hand, taking technical cybersecurity measures will raise our digital resilience to malicious cyber attacks. On the other hand, establishing rules of the road for cyberspace between organizations and governments worldwide and locally contributes to the security and integrity of everyday digital systems. In the remainder of my remarks, I would like to highlight 3 principles that contribute to building trust in cyberspace: inclusivity, responsibility, and sustainability. For each of these principles, I will give concrete practical examples of actions. Firstly, inclusivity. In the view of the Netherlands, it is very difficult for any agreed international framework to be implemented effectively when it is not based upon an inclusive process. That is why it was very encouraging to see the entire UN membership agree upon the norms for responsible state behavior in the UN Open-Ended Working Group earlier this year. We hope to move this consensus forward in the new Open-Ended Working Group starting in December 2021. Inclusivity also means that all stakeholders cooperate effectively to raise trust in cyberspace. Cyberspace belongs to everyone and to no one. The strong involvement of the private sector in cyberspace and the expertise of academia and civil society on specific cyber issues cannot be overstated. In that sense, the Netherlands is pleased to see a strong multi-stakeholder component in the negotiations of a UN Convention on Cybercrime, the Ad Hoc Committee. Inclusivity is closely related to ownership. When we engage in capacity building efforts, the Netherlands has been a vocal proponent of local communities and institutions taking ownership. The Global Forum on Cyber Expertise, based in the Netherlands, is a prime example of public-private capacity building. It is a platform that brings together needs, resources, and expertise and tailors its efforts to local contexts. We invite all those present here today and not yet a member to join the Global Forum on Cyber Expertise. Secondly, responsibility. International trust in cyberspace can only be attained when states are guided in their actions by international law and the norms for responsible state behavior in cyberspace, as they have been adopted by the UN Group of Governmental Experts last May. When states do behave irresponsibly, the international community should hold them accountable through jointly coordinated diplomatic responses, such as démarches behind closed doors or public statements. Governments also have a responsibility to enable an open, free, and secure digital environment in their local context by enabling local innovations to push back against external monopolies and by setting up a dedicated computer emergency response team, but also through a national regulatory framework for personal data protection. In that regard, the data flagship project of the Smart Africa Alliance is a good example of concrete cooperation between the EU and the African Union under the EU's Digital for Development Hub. Local businesses, civil society, academia, and governments alike have a responsibility for the societal impact of the use of data and digital technologies. This is especially paramount when it comes to the promotion and protection of human rights online. Human rights and cybersecurity are complementary, mutually reinforcing and interdependent. Human rights should be at the center of the development of new technologies and applicable legislation at all levels. Thirdly, sustainability. Indeed, a peaceful, inclusive, and reliable digital environment is essential to achieving the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. The use of digital technologies can either accelerate or undermine progress towards the SDGs. It is with good reason that the UN Secretary General recently characterized connectivity as SDG 0, particularly goals 9 and 10 to ensure a resilient infrastructure and reduce inequalities, but also goal 16 to build an effective, inclusive, and accountable institutions. In June 2020, the UN Secretary General published his roadmap for digital cooperation. The roadmap builds on recommendations of the high-level panel on digital cooperation and calls for the UN to prioritize broader issues of trust and security in helping to achieve the SDGs, and to explore a high-level statement on digital trust and security. Such a statement can drive action with the aim of ensuring that trust and security is recognized as a key piece of bridging the digital divide. Lastly, results and agreements are not sustainable when they are not properly implemented. In fact, if we do not cooperate internationally to implement agreements, they risk becoming empty shells and undermine other ongoing multilateral discussions. Therefore, the Netherlands is strongly in favor of a multilateral program of action to advance responsible behavior in cyberspace, focused on implementation of international law and agreed norms of state behavior. Before giving the floor back to our moderator, Bruce McConnell, let me underline that this very roundtable we participate in today also contributes to these three principles of inclusivity, responsibility, and sustainability in cyberspace. Therefore, I would like to thank our co-host South Africa for the good cooperation, and ORF America and Research ICT Africa for their excellent guidance. And I wish the panelists a fruitful and insightful discussion. And please, to all, don't hesitate to ask them questions during the Q&A. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Ambassador Jaarsma. That was excellent. Our opening speakers have really framed this picture in a big, on a big canvas. We have a big canvas here talking about knowledge-based economies and sustainable development, trust, security, and program of action. So let's get right into it. As I said, we are talking about global, regional, and national implications of development and peace and security, and how those two things fit together, how they fit together in a sustainable way, how they promote equity, and how they support human rights. And underlying all this, of course, is the great question of capacity, diplomatic capacity, technical capacity, and the shortage global of people who know how to figure out how cyberspace works and how to explain it and how to make it better. So we all have our work cut out for us here, everyone on this call, and we really appreciate your participation. So we're going to start out here with our distinguished panelists. We have in the following order. We will start with Kaleem Ousmani, who is the head of CERT Mauritius. And all of you know the CERT is the Computer or Cyber Emergency Response Team. He will be followed by Anriette Esterhuysen, who is the chair of the Multistakeholder Advisory Group of the Internet Governance Forum, and who I served with on the Global Commission for Stability in Cyberspace. And finally, we are hopeful to have be joined by Mokhtar Yadali, the African Program Director of the Global Forum for Cyber Expertise, GFCE. Fortunately, as good cyber people, we always have a backup plan. So we have Chris Painter in the audience, and he will jump in if need be and say a few things, give it a little bit of a GFCE perspective. After we have those opening remarks, we'll bring in Mojehi Makumane, who is a researcher currently at UNIDIR, but also a former South African expert to the UN Group of Governmental Experts and Open-Ended Working Group. So all-star cast, and I'm going to get out of the way now. And Kaleem, how are you thinking about these questions these days from your position in a very real kind of operational situation?
So thank you so much, Bruce, and thanks for giving me the floor. And let's say, first of all, thank all the organizers for inviting me to this particular roundtable meeting. It's always a pleasure. And as Bruce has mentioned, that I'm heading the Mauritian Computer Emergency Response Team, and then obviously my focus of talking today, that how do we see that today in Africa, how this international collaboration and how the whole digital transformation is important in aspect that how let's say it will lead towards collaboration, first of all. So if let's say we say that digital transformation, obviously a digital transformation is the key, and it is important all the way. And once we are talking especially into this COVID let's say era, there it is much more important. And if we see let's say, for example, from every country perspective, digitalization is the focus. And why digitalization is the focus? Because it is connecting people, and it's making things easy for people to let's say working remotely, and basically this is a kind of a, let's say, a driver which is helping people connected. But at the same time, coming back to the let's say whole discussion of a digital transformation, though digital transformation is for example, is a leapfrog in bringing and connecting people. At the same time, it has a number of challenges as well. And once we are talking about those challenges, and I think we are talking on those challenges as per our concept note here, and the challenges which we are talking here is the digital sovereignty. I think this is one component. The protection of human rights online, that's the second component. And the third component here, equalities and digital resiliency. So once let's say we are talking on these lines, and these are the concerns for let's say the whole region as well as a global concern, how we will be able to sit together and see that how this could be, let's say, in a way find out the ways to address these particular issues. And coming back to let's say these issues, if I try to connect some sort of, let's say, as the ambassadors have mentioned, the implementation and the negotiation and the collaboration of countries with the let's say international processes especially, and these international processes, once we are talking about these processes, we are talking about, let's say, international, let's say, UN norms and the CBMs, and of course the applicability of international law in cyberspace. So if this is the case, my viewpoint here is that how much do we understand this whole concept within Africa, how important it is for, let's say, the African countries. And normally, maybe also I wanted to mention a few things that what is happening and in which direction we need to go, so that more and more countries, they understand the whole process. And then secondly, at the end of the day, I think even Dr. Catherine Gatau, is here, she's our senior, in fact, in a way that she has been, let's say, representing Africa in this process for a very long time. So we have to have a kind of a position which allows us the understanding of the whole process, and we can, let's say, maximize the implementation out of, let's say, reaping out the benefits of all these processes of, let's say, especially UN ones. I'm talking about the OEWG and the GG, and then of course it connects to the norms and the capacity building measures. So if Bruce, you allow me to, let's say, comment a little bit about what is the status like. Still, we believe that the whole understanding of the norms and the CBM's, let's say, implementation within the continent, it is not to the level which it should be, and there are different reasons for that, and those different reasons, obviously, the maturity of these countries in terms of, for example, let's say, their cybersecurity is faced, because different countries, they have a different maturity level, and the more mature they are, then accordingly they understand these processes, because of course this connects, because once what it connects to, and I'm coming from the background of the suits, for me it connects to the incident resolution in particular, because if I talk about incident resolution, then incident resolution connects to country. So this is what has to be driven, so that all these, let's say, these norms, and if we see, they are the soft laws as well at the same time, and many countries in Africa right now, they are in the process of, let's say, having a different cybersecurity or cybercrime laws into their, let's say, country, in order to have the whole governance of cybersecurity much better. So I think having said this, we need to have this kind of orientation where we start understanding that how the implementation of these norms in the CPMs will eventually help country in order to resolve incidents, particularly, let's say, as soon as possible, because it connects to a number of things. It connects to, let's say, your internal organization, as well as also it connects to your international collaboration and the diplomatic relations, which allows you to link to the other country. But for that, we need to have a common platform. And that common platform could be, of course, one between, let's say, collaboration between country to country based onto these processes, so that we are able to do it. And once this is done, then obviously it will be much easier for the countries in order to do that. So maybe, Bruce, if you want me to stop here, because I'm having a few more things to add that how this is going to happen. So if, let's say, I take it up now, or maybe we can, let's say, go ahead and we discuss, and then we come up along these lines, the way you advise me. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that sounds good. That's a great, I think you really brought in the practical elements of this, and the connection between the big picture and the, trying to actually get stuff done. So I do want to come back to those things. Let's hear from a couple of the other speakers, and we'll get back around. Thank you so much, Kaleem.
Okay, then I stop here. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Anriette?
Hi, Bruce. I will enable my video for a minute, but then I'm going to disable it just because my bandwidth is not great. Well, thank you very much for including me today in this really important event, and welcome to everyone who's joined us. I think I'll reflect on this assumption that we so often work with when we talk about digitalization, about its potential to leapfrog economic growth. And the ambassador in her opening remarks talked about putting equality and security on the same level. And she warned against the risks of increased inequality. And that's really where I would like to build from. Digital transformation of an economic and social context, or contexts that are already deeply unequal, come with the risks of not just failing to reduce the divides, but actually to increase them. And I think the realities we have to face in our region, in South Africa, in other countries in the region and beyond in the continent, is that we do exist with very deep economic and social divides. This is what Research ICT Africa's Alison Gilwald always refers to as the digital inequality paradox. And as digital transformation takes place, what happens? It requires more data, faster bandwidth, smarter devices, more human capacity, new skills. This might work for those sectors of our societies who can afford the data, who have the devices, who have access to the bandwidth, who have the human capacity. But what about those who do not have those? what does it mean for them? Are they then left even further behind than they were already? And in fact, if you look at statistics, that is really what we seem to see is happening, particularly, in fact, I looked earlier today at as internet penetration and growth of mobile coverage in Africa has increased, that's not necessarily been accompanied by a similar increase in use of the internet. And in fact, the gap between coverage and availability of mobile data and use of mobile data grows year after year. So to move ahead, what does this mean for the implementation of digital transformation, which we are talking about? I think that it really, for me, comes back to states having to prioritize. I think they have to take into account, Ambassador Jaarsma talked about inclusivity, responsibility, and sustainability. And I think they're all incredibly important, but I think they should direct these towards the building blocks that we need to create an enabling environment for digital transformation, and for digital transformation, in fact, to decrease social and economic inequality. So for it to take place in a way that actually achieves those goals that we are all striving for. And what does this mean? I think it means for states focusing on not always having to do everything themselves. They also lack capacity and resources, but by creating enabling environments. And here, enabling environments can result in enabling, or can consist of enabling policy and regulation, enabling investment of public resources and public initiatives, enabling participation and collaboration between private sector and civil society. So, it can mean different things. I think what we really need to focus on is enabling environments for equitable, affordable access to infrastructure. So this goes right down to looking at the regulatory context. How do we enable more diverse access ecosystems, more small players entering the market, less dependency on mobile data, more public access in libraries and public institutions, and so on. And then secondly, looking at human capacity. How do we build the human capacity that can facilitate and enable people and institutions to gain value from digital transformation? So here again, it looks at states making policy on education, on digital literacy, partnering with employers, with civil society organizations, with universities to build that human capacity. And then thirdly, to try and enable an environment of trust and openness, respect for rights, freedom of expression and opinion, and trust in governance that can lead to greater public participation, to people being willing to use digital tools and platforms to participate in social and political processes. And I think just really to re-emphasize here, I think that collaboration is absolutely key. I think the UN Secretary General's emphasis on digital cooperation is vital. I think often our states feel under pressure to deliver. This often then coincides with a tendency to want to control. And I think that is not what will work. What will work is states providing leadership to enable participation, collaboration between all stakeholder groups, and setting a common vision for using digital transformation towards creating more social and economic equality. So that's it. I'll respond more later if there are questions. So prioritization, enabling environment, focusing on the fundamental building blocks, which is affordable access to infrastructure for everyone and the human capacity to benefit from that, and an environment that builds trust and cooperation. Back to you, Bruce.
That was lovely. Thank you so much, Anriette. And leadership versus control too, always a challenge for states. So thank you for those insights. Really great setting of the stage. So we, as I mentioned earlier, we are now implementing our backup plan here. for the GFCE, and I'm happy to welcome my current and former colleague, Chris Painter, who also served on the Global Commission for Stability of Cyberspace and is heading up the Global Forum on Cyber Expertise. Chris, welcome.
Thank you, and I'm certainly, I don't pretend to be a substitute for Mokhtar, who many of you may know, and we are very fortunate, the GFC is very fortunate to have him. He spent many years at the African Union Commission working on these issues and continues to work on these issues. Indeed, I think he's meeting with the African Union Commission right now, so that was one of the issues. But I'm the president of the Global Forum on Cyber Expertise Foundation. I was there at the beginning of it. And I think, as many of you know on this call, as important as all these other issues are in cyberspace, as important as some of the discussions have been in the UN around norms, around state conduct, some of the issues about digital development, which are critically important, I think foundational to all of that really is this idea of capacity building. If countries and states can't participate in these discussions on a diplomatic level, or they can't participate in having a digital economy because their cybersecurity is faulty, because they don't have things like were mentioned by some of the speakers earlier, like national certs or cybercrime laws or trained personnel or structures in their government to deal with these issues, they'll be left behind, and that's just not acceptable. This is not an issue, as was said earlier by our South African colleague, that is the province only of the rich and powerful states. This is something that has to be the province of every state. And it's important, not just because these are common transborder threats that we face, not just because the criminals and bad guys, whether they're states or others, are good at routing their attacks through countries who don't have these structures, but because this is a common endeavor for all of us. This is something we all need to work on. I was struck during the UN Open-Ended Working Group, which I attended several meetings of, that the number one item that was raised again and again was the issue of capacity building, of cyber capacity building. And that's precisely what the Global Forum on Cyber Expertise was set up to do, as Nathalie mentioned in the beginning. Now 6.5 years, I guess, old, created in 2011, now with 145 members and partners, including, I think, over 60 countries, private sector entities, civil society, and academia. And it really is set up to help countries around the world, including countries, particularly in this region, do more with capacity building, helping to coordinate all the things that are out there, helping to promote these issues. We have things like something called the Civil Portal, which is a portal with hundreds and hundreds of different best practices, other tools that can be used by countries around the world. We have various working groups that are set up on things like policy and national strategies, diplomacy and norms, incident response and certs, cybercrime, standards, and awareness and training that countries and other participants participate in. And most importantly, we have a matchmaker function where countries, if they need help, we try to match them with the people who need help. So those are all been important in sort of development. And as we try to take this forward, we have been spending quite a lot of time in Africa. Our last physical meeting before everything kind of was taken down by the pandemic was indeed our last international meeting was in Africa at the African Union back in, I guess, the end of 2019. It seems so long ago. We have an African project we're doing with the backing of the Gates Foundation. We have backing of other supporters to do more work in Africa. So Africa is a key region with us. Mokhtar is connecting with all the regional organizations, including SADC, all the different countries, so we can get a better sense of what Africa actually needs. Capacity building has to be demand driven and not just layered on in terms of what people want to give you. You have to make sure this actually works. There is, one of the things that I think we see is that there is, unequal maturity in countries, not just in Africa, but around the world, but certainly in Africa. So it makes it more difficult for them to do things like have implement all the measures coming out of the UN, like norms and capacity building, but also it limits their ability to protect their critical infrastructure, their ability to investigate incidents. One of the things that both of the reports coming out of the UN emphasized capacity building and talked about all the things that can happen, and that these are multi-stakeholder efforts. So I'll stop there. I'll just refer you to, there are many different things out there. I refer you to our website, the www.thegfc.org, which has all this information on it. We welcome more countries to join us and more members to join us. So that offer that Nathalie made, I make too. We want more people to become part of us. I'm really excited about the Africa project that Mokhtar is leading up. And I think this will be a platform for more and more discussions with all of us, hopefully sometime in person soon. So Bruce, thank you. And I turn the floor back over to you.
And thank you so much, Chris. Thanks for stepping in and for the perspective. We love partnering with GFCE, with the GFCE. And I know you have to also have a conflict in a few minutes. So thank you for joining us here. So with this, we've set the table here, and I want to ask our respondent, Modiehi, to kind of kick off the discussion here with any thoughts or insights that have come to you during listening to this distinguished set of opening remarks.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me, and thank you so much for such an interesting conversation. I've been taking copious notes here. And I will start by what Chris was just talking about, which was the number of times capacity building came up in the UN discussions. What I think was the second most highlighted issue was also about the positive benefits of cyber for development, which is basically one of the pillars of the discussions today. And from that very high level UN vantage point, the discussions on cyber peace and security by design of the UN tend to defer discussions about development to other bodies. And it's something that continuously happened. However, you will see that in most of the contributions that member states from developing countries, as well as developed countries, actually were saying was, we need to protect cyberspace so that we all get to harness the positive benefits of it. And I think sometimes where we get lost is when we don't see the discussions as two sides of the same coin. And I'm using Ambassador Jaarsma's language here, of the same coin. On one side, you've got this positive relationship between SDGs and ICT. And when we look at all of the goals, there is a role that ICT plays in accelerating the achievement of those goals. And what we call leapfrogging, which is probably, in my mind, probably shorthand for quite non-linear processes connected with ICT, like the potential to accelerate the upscaling of critical services or enhancing public awareness, innovation, and connectivity. All those discussions, unfortunately, happen in isolation of the security discussions, which I think is something that we need to be having a lot more of within the same context, not to have them in the first committee and then have a separate discussion in the second committee. And by that, I mean, if you look at all of the SDGs and the role that ICTs play, there are vulnerabilities there that we aren't talking about. So beyond the digital divide that we talk a lot about with regards to ICTs and SDGs, there is a lot of cyber vulnerabilities that we aren't talking about when we talk about how ICTs are going to accelerate SDGs. And some of the panelists have already spoken about the issues of human rights in the digital era, privacy and surveillance. And that's the part of the coin that I think we need to start having a lot more discussions about. And I personally have started looking at the SDG World Summit on Information Society Matrix, and I find it to be a really underutilized tool to start reframing how member states, or even within the UN, we have discussions around ICTs, SDGs, and what the UN will call ICT security. And because if you look at those, Ambassador Diseko spoke about SDG 8, for instance, where we're talking about this ICT foundation for sustainable growth of a country's economy. That's very much linked to creating those new sector ICT jobs or transitioning the more traditional sectors. There are cyber vulnerabilities there that require, parallel to that, strong cybersecurity, which is the things that unfortunately we don't talk about when we talk about the norms. Or even when you look at Goal 9 on critical infrastructure, there is a UN norm on member states setting up rules and regulations for the protection of critical infrastructure. The infrastructure for those ICT economies will need to be protected, and it shouldn't be an afterthought, but we should be having these conversations and working alongside each other. And I think that's the one thing that we are not really always doing really well, both at the state level on discussions in the UN, or even regionally or domestically, when we think about the different strategies that we have. So you'll have a really beautiful infrastructure strategy without a protection of critical infrastructure strategy to walk alongside it, or even have the same people in the room, which leads me to what Ambassador Jaarsma spoke about, which is trust. One of the things that keeps coming up in a lot of the multi-stakeholder dialogues is that in addition to trust, trusting the ICTs that we use, there's also a problem with trust between the people that are leading these initiatives. Because you don't even, for a lot of people, you don't even know who the relevant people are to have in a room. And trust is not established when you meet someone, but it's something that is developed over time. And that is something that I think we need to be making a lot more effort in if we are going to have these concerted and comprehensive, all government, all regional, all UN approaches to ICT security or cybersecurity. But lastly, the other thing, Bruce, is also the issue of definitions. I've come alongside that a number of times. We've got on one hand what we call ICT security or cybersecurity, and what other concepts from the OECD, like digital security. And sometimes it makes it look as if we are talking about different things when we are talking about the same things. And so when we talk about the framework for responsible state behavior, people think we're just talking about international cybersecurity that has no relevance for regional or domestic realities, but we are actually contributing to that broader digital security, which is multi-layered from the individual, the state, the region, and ultimately involvement in all the multilateral processes. And I think that's where I think the role of countries can be further refined. I don't think countries are trying to control, but I think that they are trying to figure out what their role are in this digital era vis-a-vis their citizens, vis-a-vis other countries, vis-a-vis regions, and ultimately the UN. Thanks, Bruce.
Thank you. What a rich discussion. We're really holding a lot of concepts here, but I love the way it's grounded in kind of the reality of things. A long time ago, there was a discussion in the development community about, quote, appropriate technology. This was involved in the context of agricultural modernization and the Western companies bringing mechanization in, and to what extent was that appropriate in basically rural economies. And the difference between that and this, because we've been talking a little bit about appropriate technology, and that's why I brought Dr. Gatau in, because there's a good conversation going on in the chat about this topic. But the difference is that in agriculture, nobody's attacking you, right? Nobody is sending, viruses and bad seeds and stuff, usually, as a matter of state practice or criminal groups. So we have a more complicated situation here in cyberspace than we do in traditional development questions. And that's why the security problem is real and something that we have to discuss. So Kate, I wanted to bring you in here. You're a longtime observer and participant in these kinds of conversations. What's your take on this mess that we're talking about?
Thank you, Bruce, and good afternoon to all colleagues. It's certainly been a very, very interesting conversation. Now, I can be a little bit controversial because I've now retired from public service. So I'm not representing the government of Kenya. I need to give that disclaimer. Are we protecting people too much? Human beings have lived with conflict and attacks from the beginning of time, and they have survived. And perhaps those who have been attacked more have survived better because they have learned to be resilient and they have learned to solve their own problems. So my own inclination would not be to prevent people from creating their own technology and appropriate applications in order to protect them from very sophisticated attacks. But it would be to believe in human beings and in their ability to survive in harsh circumstances. And I think the African continent is one where there's great examples of people who have learned to survive in extremely harsh environments and even to thrive. In Kenya, we have demonstrated technology increased financial inclusion from around 4% when we built financial inclusion on the banking sector, which was very traditional and which we had adopted from other parts of the world, to adopting a new technology that had no policy, that had no good security measures at the beginning. But as I always say, you had the choice whether to get on a bus at the end of the month and carry your monthly salary to your family and probably get hit over the head and your wallet snatched, or you could send it using mobile money. And of course, again, there was a risk that you could lose the money. But when people counted the risk, they felt that the risk of sending it by mobile money was actually lower than the risk of putting it in your wallet, in your pocket, and carrying it through public transport, which of course had a cost, and getting safely home and taking the money to source. So maybe this is a controversial view, but I think that yes, we need to build a resilient environment, but we also need to believe in human beings and in their ability to cope, to innovate, and to survive.
Words to live by, as usual. Thank you. That's why we love you, Kate. You are controversial. All right, well, I'm going to ask our panelists to respond to some of this, and in particular, kind kind of this question of how to, we just have taken the conversation down into the question of sustainable development and equity and believing in human potential. How does diplomacy fit into all this? So, I mean, Modjehi, you mentioned these things are in two different committees, and it's not always hooked up very well. But let me ask Kaleem and then Anriette for your views on that question and any other things that have been coming up for you in this conversation. And please keep writing questions in the chat or in the Q&A. I'm paying attention to those and trying to bring those in as well. Kaleem?
Coming back to your question, and once, let's say, especially cyber diplomacy, I totally believe that it plays a role, and it plays a role in different ways. And first of all, it plays a role in terms of, let's say, a resolution of let's say incidents, because we are talking about cybersecurity. I think Multistakeholder discussed about different types of let's say terms where how we are defining cybersecurity and what fits in and what fits into the context of the UN processes, what fits in the let's say context of cyber diplomacy. But ultimately, at the end of the day, Bruce, what we are trying to let's say resolve here is how we'll be able to better protect. And once we are talking about how we are able to protect, then the collaboration is the key. And without that, you can't do otherwise. And you have to do that. And there are a number of elements involved into that, because if I talk from the technical background, and I think I saw one of the let's say comments from the attendees, they have been talking about building the let's say I mean capacity and then filling up the capital shortage which we have in different countries in the area of cybersecurity. So that's also connect in a way somehow somewhere, but we need to have capacity, and capacity is important. And especially if you look at the case of Africa, the capacity is really important. How? I can explain that. For example, harmonization of let's say different legal instruments with the international let's say best practices or convention, and even its applicability, that how it applies in the domestic, for example, context from the let's say international best practices. This is one. Secondly, also like capacity building, because we do not have people, and if we do not have people, ultimately it becomes very, very difficult for anyone to let's say protect their critical infrastructures or systems, let's say the way it should be, and this is what the capacity we are talking about. So coming back to the whole understanding of the cyber diplomacy, I would say, Bruce, that this is important, and this is important in a way that it connects to a number of threats, and then surely this will establish the peace and stability, let's say, I mean, in the region and globally. And that's why I believe that this is an important threat which we need to start, let's say, talking about, because countries like in Europe and other places, already they have taken a leapfrog stand onto that, its understanding and its application. But at the same time, if I talk about, let's say, our region, there we have to start with that. So starting means that it doesn't mean that people, they do not understand it, but it's just that it has to be, let's say, exercised in such a way that its benefits could be reaped. That's the point which I wanted to, let's say, mention here. Thank you.
Thank you, Kaleem. Thank you so much. All right, Anriette, I want to hear from you, and then I'm going to ask Ambassador Jaarsma to comment on some of these points that are being made.
Thanks, Bruce. I agree with everything Kaleem said. I would add that diplomacy and multi-stakeholder collaboration need to interconnect. And I think we exist with a very quite a hard separation between what is diplomacy on the one hand, which operates in the multilateral space, within UN processes, between states at regional level and sub-regional level. And on the other hand, we have this much more aspirational, open, collaborative, multi-stakeholder collaboration context of the IGF, for example. And I think we need more checks and balances at both levels and to build bridges between them. When our states go to the open-ended working group and put forward propositions there, those propositions needed to have actually been brainstormed and consulted around at home first between multiple government departments, so at a cross-sectoral level within government and also with other relevant stakeholder groups. Similarly, when our states return from their diplomatic missions and events, they need to debrief, they need to engage stakeholders again. So you don't have to do away with separate roles and responsibilities and processes for different stakeholders. Diplomacy is extremely important, but you need to integrate those with the more open-ended and collaborative forms, because the bottom line remains that achieving this transformation, achieving and maintaining cyber stability and security requires collaboration between different actors and stakeholder groups.
You know, you're so right, Anriette, and certainly for those of us who've experienced working inside governments, it's a problem even inside government. And so the diplomats who often appear with of course, the exception of Ambassador Jaarsma, but who appear in these meetings to talk about cyber may or may not have coordinated with the development department or even the Defense Department. And so it's a challenge, but then to add the multi-stakeholder angle on here is such an important thing, and we're all trying to do better at that. Ambassador Jaarsma, what are your thoughts having heard this conversation so far?
Yeah, thank you very much. A couple of reflections. I think indeed what Molehi said about the way the UN committees are being structured. I mean, of course, that is a design that was developed shortly after the Second World War. And so when you look at the first committee, this is really about, sort of the war seen through this more traditional lens. So I do agree that we need to be able to make those bridges. And I actually think that the UN Secretary General also sees that, because with the high-level panel and the roadmap that he has initiated, he's actually trying to do that. And we are one of the co-champions of this high-level panel recommendation on trust and security. So it is about whether we can come up with a sort of a statement that would be action-driven, that would perhaps have the same kind of actionable impact as the SDGs. That is my vision on it. But then you see that the stakeholders that are more involved in the first committee processes don't see per se the use of such a statement. But I think it's really to build those bridges is pivotal. Another point I would like to make is indeed this coordination with the multi-stakeholder community. And some people are asking the question, who are the multi-stakeholders? And I think that's a very good question, because especially when you talk about the tech community, when I go around, and I mean, I've only been in this position for just over a year, and I've been primarily meeting people online. So, I mean, I need to be a bit humble in terms of how much I have seen. But I come across a lot of the big tech companies, but like the smaller Dutch innovative startups that can really change our digital life, they're not part of this multi-stakeholder community per se. I mean, I don't see them in the UN context. And I think what is really challenging for us as diplomats is to get their view on things. And what we have already established, for example, for the first committee, we have an existing process to consult with a broader group of stakeholders, but those are traditionally more sort of the NGOs that are interested in the first committee process. But I would like to have more engagement with other actors as well in my own country to understand where their interests are and what their worries are, and to be able to sort of take that into account when I go to these international meetings. But then, of course, also they are also when they want, they need to have their own voice in international settings. We are waiting for a new government to be formed in the Netherlands, but I expect that once we have a new government, that we will draft a new cybersecurity strategy. And the one thing that we have learned from the previous years is that we had sort of a national cybersecurity strategy that was mainly focused on resilience, and we had an international cybersecurity strategy that was about the normative framework, about holding actors accountable, sort of diplomatic response to malicious actors, and then capacity building. But we want to combine things better. And for that, we are actually setting up this process to engage with private actors and NGOs, as well as the private sector.
Yeah, no, your comments are great, and especially this. That's exciting news to hear about the new strategy. So we look forward to hearing more about that as it develops. But I wanted to say that this conversation about small companies, and of course I'm coming to you from California, where we have lots of these small innovative companies, and it reminds me of the problem or the challenges that small countries face in participating. I mean, it's about capacity. If you're in a small company and a startup, you don't have time to go to some meeting where you get if you're lucky, you get to speak for 3 minutes, and and this kind of thing. So it's easier now with since we're doing many more things virtually. But I think the capacity of having somebody when you're shorthanded, as you are in these small companies and as you are in small countries, to deal with these complex issues and Lord knows the complexities of international cyber law, require volumes. I think we're starting on volume 3 now in Tallinn. So it's like, there's this big gap there. And I really think, as Anriette was saying in the chat, and Kate has also said, figuring out how to bring these other people in through consultative mechanisms. Anriette was saying that it's working pretty well in South Africa, and the South African IGF could help in that. So I think this is a big challenge, because when you get down to the development side of things, and in this conversation about appropriate technology, it's like, okay, well, who says? What are the cyber-enabled job creation, and what those jobs look like, and is that what how do people make those transitions? We're coming close to the end of this part before I get to turn it over to Enrico. But I wanted to ask you, Mojehi, if you had any other views on this conversation that we've been having.
Thanks, Bruce. I've just been following the conversation in the chat and also the one taking place here. And I'll just say something about the role of the diplomat in all of this. I was a generalist foreign service officer, no special cyber training on my side. And for developing countries like South Africa, I think like many others on this call, I think when you're a diplomat or when you are representing your country, the biggest thing that you can do is to buy policy space. And that's what I think sometimes we downplay the importance of being able to do something like that. As a result, in those meetings, sometimes I had to say no, based on instruction from head office as well as from the mission, to say no to a concept. There was, for instance, the idea of mainstreaming common but differentiated responsibility in the cyber discussions. What does that mean in cyber? We know what it means in the climate context. They spent years trying to talk about that concept. What does it mean in cyber? And who will be able to actually implement CBDR in the cyber context? Sometimes it was just putting a pause on some things, like what kind of protections do we offer for different people involved in the cyber arena? We protect cert workers. What do we do for the penetration testers? That's a really technical issue, which a generalist diplomat doesn't just wake up and know, right? That there are special protections needed for them. And sometimes it was saying yes and railing behind Dr. Getao and Dr. Kalim on capacity building. Put as much in there as we possibly can, and then go back home and encourage our countries and our different departments to take advantage of every single opportunity for capacity building that presents itself, because no one is going to force capacity building on you. We work particularly hard to make sure that the language said upon request. So we had to come back and ask our departments, request assistance, it's there. And I think that's a really important role that we underplay as developing countries. And I think that that's something that we need to continue doing, and to not undermine the importance of buying your country space for it to develop the policies that it needs to develop, and not rush it. And also, on the other hand, to be able to, in that multilateral setting, to say, we are not done. We are not all on the same page. We need to put a pause on this until we can all catch up. This is not a race, because cyberspace belongs to all of us. Yeah. Thanks, Bruce.
Thank you so much for that. It reminds me of a senior Indian diplomat who once, I was sitting across the table from as the American in the room, and she said, yes, well, thank you to America for creating this beautiful internet, which is now a resource of the world, owned by the world, right? And so that transition is still happening, and that has still got a long way to go. Okay, I'm going to ask Enrico to give us some thoughts, but before I do, I want to thank everybody who has been here. I'll be back at the end to say goodbye, but particularly to our speakers and panelists, our two ambassador friends, Kalim and Anriette, and Chris Painter, our pitch hitter, and Mujehi, also Kate Getao for coming in and helping out. And then all the people who have been chatting and asking questions. I can't name everybody. Sorina Asefa, Moses Soboi, Tomslin Saminor, I'm saying these wrong, I'm sure, Andreas Kuhn, and others in the chat. So with that, it's been a really great conversation so far, and I know Enrico has some provocative things to talk to us about.
Thank you very much, Bruce, also for your kind words, and thank you all for staying with us until now. Yes, of course, this conversation has really been interesting. This roundtable on cyber cooperation and on some of the challenges of implementing digital transformation. So our speakers have provided a number of insightful perspectives on a number of issues, and now my difficult role is to try to connect the dots between why we organized this roundtable, the issues we wanted to cover, and what has been discussed today. So I'm really sorry if I'm going to miss some of the very provocative and insightful views that you had the luck of hearing today. So yesterday I read an interesting article published on the Daily Maverick and written by advocate Sizwe Snail from the South African Information Regulator. In the article, he stressed the importance of, on the one hand, to promote access to information as a human and constitutional right, to enable the realization of other rights, for instance, the right to vote, but also the rights of vulnerable people to information. And lastly, the right to internet connectivity. This became particularly important and in front of all our eyes during COVID-19, as mentioned also by Khalim Ousmani, because the pandemic has highlighted the importance of connectivity and how enabling greater connectivity should be a priority of our Southern African countries. And why? Because according to advocate Sizwe, connectivity is a solutions catalyst, and internet access in Africa currently is more vital than ever before. Internet now has become a must-have and not a nice-to-have, he concluded in his article. But the reality is that Southern African countries, with a few exceptions, are still not nearly connected enough, as we also discussed. And there are large differences in internet access between rural and urban areas and across income and gender lines that still persist in our countries. Now, during the roundtable, we tried to go even a step further and discuss what are some of the negative implications of African countries leapfrogging by using digital technologies for development purposes. Because the reality is that digitalization not only creates opportunities, and therefore its developmental potential should be harnessed, as mentioned also by Ambassador Mxakato-Diseko in her introductory remarks, but can also exacerbate existing inequalities. And the problem of inequalities was stressed, for instance, by Anriette Esterhuysen, as she explained this digital paradox. And so existing approaches to improve connectivity may need to be reevaluated, or probably we need to identify new strategies to ensure that the benefits of digitalization are equal for all. So what is needed, Anriette, for instance, made a suggestion, is this enabling environment for equitable, inclusive, and affordable access, with enabling policy and regulation with the related investment and forms of collaboration, which is again key, and this was mentioned also by Khalim. In fact, the reality is that as digitalization grows, we have realized that states and non-state actors can, for instance, collect private data about citizens, sometimes without having in place the right checks and balances, or they can monopolize key elements of the IT infrastructure, and so can determine the rules of the game without engaging with the local actors, for instance. So this could lead to anti-competitive behavior in telecommunications market, resulting in unaffordability of connectivity, a huge problem in the African context, and on lack of transparency and accountability in the governance of the internet. As we stated in the concept note for this roundtable, in the current geopolitical context, state and non-state actors are trying to exert dominance by controlling areas and different elements of the digital economy. In the case of governments, they might be motivated by their own strategic national and regional interests. And in the case of private companies, the motivation normally is profit and market growth. So the emergence of these geopolitical and profit-driven tensions that come with digitalization may weaken country abilities to self-determination in cyberspace and to develop a positive agenda on digital sovereignty, something also that we mentioned today. So these tensions have a negative effect also on building trust in cyberspace, something that was mentioned a few times in the roundtable and especially by Ambassador Jaarsma. This is very relevant also in the context of the recently concluded first round of the United Nations Open-Ended Working Group, which was established to discuss responsible state behavior in cyberspace. Positively, in May 2021, all UN members agreed on the final report of this group, of the Open-Ended Working Group. And interestingly, the Open-Ended Working Group has connected cybersecurity and development, as also Molihei Makuman has mentioned. There was agreement that we need to protect cyberspace to harness the benefit of it. And compared to earlier stages of this dialogue, more emphasis was added this time also on national measures. So both to implement what has been negotiated and agreed at the UN level and to encourage national contributions to this open, secure, and stable and peaceful cyberspace, for instance, by means of national legislation. To support states to implement the recommendations of the report, the final report of the Open-Ended Working Group stresses that states can also use a national survey on the implementation of the UN resolution on ICT international security that was adopted in 2015. That could help them inform the Secretary General on their views, on the lessons that they've learned while implementing the recommendations, sharing good practices, and of course, building capacity. Now, the importance of implementation has been mentioned a few times during this roundtable, for instance, also by Kalim Osmani. And from our perspective, the survey of national efforts can be used to track progress with implementation of norms of state behavior, for instance, or to express national views on what it is the application of international law in cyberspace. And the initiative is particularly relevant and important for South Africa, which is a country sponsoring the survey. It could really, from my perspective, set a standard for other countries in the region on operationalizing this survey, for instance. And in that respect, countries can also, in that respect, to help countries to implement the recommendations, they could also take into account the 2021 UN GGE report, which offers really a very good and thorough commentary on how the 2015 recommendations are to be implemented. But as we mentioned, state, of course, needs capacity to implement the recommendations of the report. And capacity is foundational of all these discussions, as also Chris Painter mentioned. Now, interestingly, the report lays out some principles of capacity building with the UN. And also Ambassador Jaarsma mentioned some principles in their opening remarks. Some of them overlap. So the principles of cyber capacity building of the UN include issues related to cooperation, to mutuality and trust, and the importance of developing initiatives based on nationally identified needs and priorities. And principles are also based on, take the perspective of development. So principles indicate, I don't know, the cyber capacity building should be gender sensitive, inclusive, non-discriminatory, and contribute to closing the digital divides. And capacity building, of course, is also linked to the second main component of this discussion, which was cyber and resilience. Now, the reality is that, again, the region, the Southern African region, is lagging behind in terms of cyber capacity and on human capacity as well, as Anriette Esterhuysen emphasized. And there is a need of putting lots of energy work to be placed at different, that needs to be placed at different levels. So while it is important to build institutions and capacity on cyber policy, as we mentioned, and also as emphasized in the Sustainable Development Goal 16 that we mentioned in our concept note, it's necessary also to build the capacity of the entire population, of the small and medium enterprises, and of the informal economy that is increasingly reliant on ICT, because those are the most vulnerable of societies. In a study that my center, the Cybersecurity Capacity Center for Southern Africa, the UCT, conducted, emerged that cyber awareness raising, for instance, in the region is estimated to be low, except for a few countries where there are a few initiatives to raise awareness about cybersecurity. So now, to conclude, I'd like to stress that we need then to move from discussing these issues to action. And action is needed urgently, from my perspective, across many dimensions, so that all countries somehow can keep up and then move together if possible at a certain point. So the UN reports of the Open-Ended Working Group and the GGE provide good principles, recommendations, and tools to do so. And so they can really guide countries to implement digital transformation to cooperation. So what is needed then? We need to investigate the issues of digital transformation, development, and cyber capacity to understand them through research. But also we need to put in place the right collaborative mechanisms nationally across departments and with other stakeholders, including academia, civil society organizations, and the private sector. And then across countries, internationally, and across institutions, to both be the strategic partnership, but also the operational partnerships on digital transformation and cyber capacity building. And we need to improve coordination between different existing initiatives to have a greater impact and not to waste resources. And as Anriette also mentioned in her final remarks, we need cyber diplomacy and multi-stakeholder collaboration to connect. And to make these processes truly inclusive of all stakeholders, we need not only to include and to discuss these issues with big players and those that can afford, but really with everybody who has a stake in that. And it's really everyone at all levels. And all this evidence also takes us to the conclusion that from my perspective, we do need to act now. So yeah, with this, I would like to pass now this virtual microphone back to Bruce McConnell for his final words. And yeah, I would like to thank you all again for staying with us until now.
Thank you, thank you, Enrico, and that's right. We got to move towards action, no doubt about it. All right, good. Well, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much. I want to thank particularly our partners, not only ICT for Research ICT for Africa, Enrico, thank you, but in particular, the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs, both in The Hague and in Pretoria with team leader Emma Boki and of course, Ambassador Ann Peters. Thank you for joining us today, as well as Durko, and in particular Lunga Bengu, who is the counterpart there for our planning team. So we will keep you posted. There'll be after action that comes out on this, which will, and also we'll be posting the recording. Again, thank you, as Enrico says, thank you for sticking around and for the whole time, and we will see you soon, we hope.